Welcome, everyone. My name is Shayna Glenzer. I'm with CrowdScout, and we are going to go ahead and get started. A few more may join, but we've got a good group here, and so let's go ahead and kick it off. First things first, quick few housekeeping items. One is that we are recording this webinar, and we will send the recording out to you after the event, so you don't have to scribble feverishly about with notes. You'll receive the slides and the recording afterwards. Also, you're muted right now, but so go ahead, and if you have questions, there's a Q&A box or a chat box that you're able to use to ask questions throughout the webinar, and we will make sure to get to those at the end. But first, let me go ahead and kick things off by introducing Lucy Caldwell. Lucy's the Chief Strategy Officer and EVP at CrowdScout. She was a longtime practitioner in this space, and she's going to go ahead and kick us off and introduce our other guest panelists. Lucy, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Shayna. Hey guys, it's great to be with you today. I'm Lucy, and as Shayna said, I work as our Chief Strategy Officer here at CrowdScout, and really excited. We've been kicking around this topic for a little while, and we've been doing that for a couple of reasons. One is that we hear from a lot of people that data and being data-driven is really daunting to them because they know that it could make a difference in their organization, but they don't know how to do it in the heat of a moment on a campaign, or do it in such a way that doesn't cause them to have to totally reinvent the wheel. So, people start thinking about how to implement data in their organizations, and it's a really daunting task. And so, we thought a lot about this, and we thought who better to bring in to help us chat about this than a couple of awesome practitioners in the space. Ashley Grant, who's joining us from Image. She's the Vice President of Client Strategy there. And then also Charles Duncan, who's the EVP at PDQ Printing of Las Vegas. So Ashley has a ton of digital experience, and Charles, has a ton of print and sort of traditional outreach methods experience. So they'll give us a great diverse set of viewpoints. So I'll go ahead and kick it off. And I want to start kind of revisiting what I mentioned a little while ago about, how do we figure out what to do here? So we're going to take this step by step. First, we're going to talk about some misconceptions about big data. Some of the things that we hear folks say that we think they got to get over that hump. Then we're going to hear a little bit from Ashley and then from Charles. I'm going to share a couple of anecdotes from our team, and then we want to turn it over to you guys in Q&A. So expect us to be done with this. It probably will take about 30 minutes to do this, but we know people have to get back to doing their work, so we'll get you through this quickly. So the first thing that I want to talk about is misconceptions of big data. And one of the big misconceptions that we see is this idea that the only way to leverage data-driven marketing and campaigns is to be a part of a large party apparatus, or really spend big dollars. And, we actually did a cool event last week with folks from both the DNC and the RNC, and those large-scale organizations are no doubt doing amazing stuff in terms of large-scale data pooling among their state parties and local coalitions of entities. But there's a lot that you can do regardless of the size of your organization. We have folks who are in shops of 5 or 6 people who are really using data to the fullest. So one of the things that we really hope you're left with this as we go along is that you really can make use of sophisticated methods of being data driven within a smaller organization. And even things like looking into your data set and learning something about how someone consumes your content, what mediums you're most successful in activating them on, or you name it, that really is putting data to work. So that's one of the things we want to put out there as we frame this out. The next thing is this misconception that the only way to leverage big data is to be reliant on a vendor or a social platform to get data that matters. And this is actually not the case at all. In fact, an over-reliance on some of those tools can actually make it harder for you to build up your own data set. But even more than that, we want to turn on its head the idea that data and data collection is something that only a formal data collector can do. So, people talk about, you take a BuzzFeed style survey and you answer 7 questions. It's, what Avenger are you? And you find out you're Captain America. Those are 7 data points that some advertiser somewhere is using to go advertise to you or outreach to you in other ways. And so, but that's actually something that a very small organization can do with very little effort. So, deploying digital tracking forms and surveys and really quick hit landing pages is a really great way to get a head start on data acquisition yourself. The third misconception before I turn it over to Ashley is that, I think people think that using a voter file is like next level stuff for a lot of folks. And that's understandable because in the old model, when I was getting started, you really, if you wanted to do anything with a voter file, it basically was a massive, massive file that was maybe sitting on a computer somewhere in your organization if you had access to it. And mostly it was this kind of thing that bounced around between vendors of yours, and you would cut it in various ways when you wanted to do something with it. And so the voter file became like this sort of almost siloed from everything you were doing. And so I think that one of the things that happened because of how unusable and unwieldy voter files used to be for people is that people sort of think of voter files as a thing that is only left to large scale organizations. And that's not true either. Increasingly you can do things like purchase small amounts of voter data and append it to your records. And of course, there are a lot of ways to do this that help sync up those voter sets with the stuff you already know about your audience. And that really gives you the ability to see whom your message resonates with, whom it doesn't resonate with, and start to form a more comprehensive data-driven strategy to outreach to folks. So with that, I want to turn it over to Ashley Grant. Ashley's a good friend of mine. She's the Vice President of Client Strategy at Image. And she's a real expert in helping to wrangle a team of strategists there that work with a variety of groups, organizations, and all shapes and sizes. So whether it's a state election or a federal issue, a ballot initiative, you name it, Ashley has really done it all. Before she was at Image, she worked as the digital political director at the NRCC, and as well as the RSLC. So she has a lot of experience.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Lucy. I really appreciate that. Like Lucy said, being the Vice President of Client Strategy here at Image, I do a lot of things that are kind of the 30,000 foot view. My job, in addition to just, helping my team, who are the experts, just crush it, because they're fantastic, fantastic professionals, and we're very fortunate to have that team at Image. My job is to help communicate kind of that big picture to the client. What we do when it comes to digital advertising, so we're a digital firm, everything we do at Image is in-house. We are full service. So we do everything from the actual creative that goes up with our videographers and our designers, to building web applications, websites, to placing the ads, to building the ad plans, optimizing, running ad tech, running viewability, and then of course everything that ties it together, the actual strategy behind that, our actual strategists. So that's really what we're dealing with when we're talking about Image. So we have an understanding of this concept of data because it's a tool that's critical to what we do. We are not data scientists. That's not what we're here for. We do not model data at Image. We have fantastic partners that we work with that do that for us, and that our clients choose to work with that do that for us. But our job, and one of the biggest things that really prompted us and our reaching out to CrowdScout this year and strengthening our relationship, was that the biggest issue that we saw in 2016 with campaigns, and we're talking congressional level campaigns, state level campaigns, we're not talking about national campaigns here, or even the party committees, but like the actual, everyday campaign you see running, was that there was no unification, there was no easy solution for unification of data online and offline. And so that's really the big picture view here, that I'm really trying to bring to you guys is letting you know that was a huge detriment. And really, really hurt the efficiency of a lot of campaigns, given that we can do so many things online these days. If all that data is siloed, it's not beneficial. It doesn't help. And so when you're having to look at individuals, either Google Docs or spreadsheets or CSVs, and you're passing things back and forth, not always sure what iterations you're using, not being able to update it in real time, not having an easy way to access it, it's not helpful. So one of the easiest things to do to begin to solve for this problem is just to get your data all in one spot. That is using an affordable, easy to use CRM that's flexible. You can plug different things into it. What's one thing that, again, not to sound like a sales pitch, but one of the reasons that we partner with CrowdScout often is because it integrates deeply with the tools that we have determined at Image after a ton of testing to be best in class. So those are things like Iterable and Rev and WordPress and Gravity Forms and all these different things that we use in our everyday work for our clients. And the other great news is that that's not only beneficial for us, but for our clients, because, I mean, they have an integration for the majority of walk apps that our clients may use or other things of that nature. And if they don't, I know I can always, call up the team and say, hey, I have a particular client looking for X, Y, or Z, and they're going to try and find a solution for us. That's been very beneficial. So it's very easy to solve for as far as, what the problem was. Data was everywhere and it wasn't all in one spot. Get your data into one spot, easy to do. And then you can start from there. You can just start putting everything in there, whether it's your voter file, whether it's email. So who's opening emails, who's not opening emails, who's clicking, who's not clicking but still opening, website, where are they landing up on your website? How are they coming through? What polls, surveys are they taking? Lucy gave a great example about that, the Avengers poll or whatever that looks like. We do that, but we do that with issues that matter for our candidates. So we want to track that back into CrowdScout so we can easily pull those universes. You can tag folks based on the ad universes that you pull. So you can know, a little more manual process, but you can go ahead and put on their record that you could know if they are, potentially in an ad universe. Granted, thanks to personally identifiable information rules, we're not able to know exactly who we match, but you can at least identify that these folks are part of that universe that you were serving to, or that received mail pieces, or that are getting door knocks. And so you can start to just put all of this into one spot. And again, like Lucy said, it's not so much of having a voter file, it's having a voter file that you augment with your first party data. That's where you're going to be able to find things that actually begin to make sense for your candidate, for your client. It doesn't just have to be a voter file. It can be any data file that you're working off of. I just happen to work in the political realm a lot, so that's what I'm using as an example. So a good example for this, and just to tell you why we determined that, the lack of a good CRM was a huge detriment, was we were working on a statewide race, gubernatorial race this past year. Crunch time, we're dealing with absentee and early vote, and we were literally passing back CSVs every single day. We had a great system set up. We had folks coming in on our custom GOTV site. They were feeding into our email workflow, and they were getting, emails following up about voting, asking them. So it's all this great online digital infrastructure. And yet I was then stuck sending them daily updates with CSV so they could get that data back into their system. And it's just like the whole system kind of broke down, versus having something real time. So for example, if we had them on CrowdScout, they were filling out those forms, it's going to be populated. Then their volunteers know they don't have to go knock on that door. They don't have to go make that phone call, because we've already identified through online means how they're going to vote or if they've already voted. So just a short little anecdote, if that makes sense. But I could tell you, another 24 like that of when we ran into that issue last cycle as well. So really kind of the last thing is, it's great if we get the data all into one spot. Again, it's not cost prohibitive. That's probably the one thing I want to underline. For example, we offer CrowdScout and an affordable pricing to all of our clients. We're very upfront and transparent about that. And just not only there's a little bit of an upfront investment, but the amount of time that you save, or the amount of money that you save in your time and your efficiency, well makes up for anything that you would spend on the front end. And that's really what we're trying to get all of our clients to realize, that yes, you do not have to be a large party committee and have a custom solution, that there are some fantastic tools out there that make it easy. And one of the things I think that's been beneficial for us as well is, we can help our clients, and that's another great thing about using a CRM. You can set up some of these filters, have a better, a better dashboard. You can kind of understand some of these, what's coming in on your data. And I have to give CrowdScout credit in this, is they've really kind of transformed, and I've seen the different iterations on their dashboards, and it's gotten continually better. It makes it a lot easier to pull in information that we want to see and be able to see it visually, to get a quick snapshot. But you really have to spend a little bit of time in there. You need to know how to use the tool. I mean, what's the benefit of you pay for a tool if you don't spend time using it? So take the time to learn, and then you'll be able to actually start looking through everything, because you've solidified it. It's all in one spot, and you can start making smarter decisions based off of all the different inferences you're able to draw from that. So one last thing that that Lucy asked me to talk about was, and I kind of hinted at this at the beginning, is how our team works. So again, at Image, and this is something we make very clear to our clients, is we're not a data team. Data and digital are not the same thing. And I know some of you may be saying, well, yeah, it's 2018. You don't need to say that anymore. You would be surprised on how often I need to say that. But this is just a reminder, especially when you're talking, if you're talking to a candidate, or you're talking to a donor, or you're talking to someone who's trying to understand this, making sure they understand that data and digital, while absolutely critical to do both of their jobs well, they are still very separate things. So making sure that we have the right infrastructure for both. So we have the right infrastructure for our data operation, right? That we have a good baseline, that we have, that if you are doing modeling, and you trust what they're doing. And if you are using a CRM to help organize everything, and that supports your digital infrastructure. If I don't have my good data, I can't go out and find the right folks online, right? So it's very, very important to realize that, and to be able to look at your data together. And it's critical that that's also synced with the rest, especially again, if you're using a campaign, or you're using a fully coordinated effort, that you're taking the time to make sure you're syncing with mail, you're syncing with TV, you're syncing with ground game. It's really important to make sure you're all on the same page and all operating off the same data sets. And then you can all do your job really well. So keep that in mind. It's the same way people like to a lot of times assume communications and digital are the same thing, when in fact, again, they're two very, very different things. So making sure that you know exactly what digital is for. So for us, again, it's like three big things for campaigns. It's acquisition, so being able to go out and acquire supporters and donors. It's persuasion, going out and persuading voters one way or the other. And then it's mobilizing voters. So it's going out and telling them to go vote, when to go vote, and how to go vote. So that's really what we do on digital. And as you can guess, all of that is dependent upon what we know and what we can find from a data standpoint.
Ashley, that's awesome. So thank you so much for that. And I think it's so great to have you end on that note, because, a lot of what you're talking about is taking results of things happening offline and making the most of them in the digital work that you're doing for your clients. And so that's a perfect entree into introducing Charles, who is the Executive Vice President of PDQ Printing, which is a big firm based in Nevada. And at PDQ, Charles oversees and manages operations for the company, and works with clients throughout their organization to help them implement smart printing strategies by maximizing the data that's available to them. And before that, he has done a lot of interesting things, but one of the things he did was actually work on the team for our former President Barack Obama during the 2008 cycle. But when Charles and I got talking earlier this week, when we were preparing for this webinar, Charles said to me that he has people say to him all the time, well, what the heck does a printer care about data for? And I said, that's perfect. I have to share that anecdote. And so that's exactly what Charles is going to do now. He's going to tell us the kind of other half of this story about how data is changing the work that he's doing in the kind of what people think of as an older model of outreach, but that I think he'll make clear to us is a pretty rapidly transforming sector of the outreach vertical. So Charles, without further ado.
Thanks, Lucy. And I've been asked that question a lot since I came to work at PDQ 4.5 years ago. And actually, it's funny, our CEO actually says to a lot of people, very few printers would probably have hired me because my background is in data. Like she said, I worked for the Obama campaign in 2008. I've worked in campaigns since 2000. I have 2 bachelor's degrees, one of them focused on voter psychology and heuristics. And I'm currently working on a master's in the same topic. But the point of that is that while I am studying to be a data scientist. My goal in that is to learn more about data and how we can create tools for our clients to use. And so where I'm kind of going with that, though, is because we kind of, I think everybody knows that, especially since the 2008 cycle, data has really become the future of campaigning, because data and touches and being able to reach out to individual voters is very, very important. And being able to track those things is very, very important. You know, and it's funny, Ashley, I actually wanted to mention, you were talking about the CSVs. I actually wanted to mention I have a floppy disk sitting on my desk from the 2000 election cycle that actually has voter data on it. And I actually don't have anything I can access it with, but I actually use it as a tool when I'm talking to people and saying data has always been important, but how we use it and how we crunch it has become even more important. So as we move into that, you know, data, like I said, is the future of campaigning, and there are a couple really important things you should consider as you determine your data. You know, and I'm going to circle back to kind of why it was important for PDQ to have data and things like that. But what I want to talk about real quick is the acquisition routes are very, very important. How you get your data. There are many ways and many providers of data out there. You can simply go to your state or local voter registrars. You can purchase it. There are so many options, and the cost of that, as we've discussed, ranges greatly. But the important thing to make sure that we focus on when you're looking at data is the cost versus how complete the data is, because cheap data may not have all the information you need. In a few minutes, I'm going to go over some questions that kind of talk about kind of what you need to ask any potential data vendor where you're planning to get data from, and we'll go into that shortly. But first, let me kind of explain why I was brought here, and why a printer, especially a printer in Nevada, cares about data. And that is that, and if we can move to the next slide, because this is where I'm going to talk about the numbers here. So Nevada is very unique, and there are some states that have unique situations like this too, where you have large voter density in one particular area. But in Nevada, Clark County has 1,664,432 of the 1.5 total million voters in the state of Nevada. So there's a huge grouping of voters in this one area. And what makes it difficult for candidates in Clark County are especially candidates that are nonpartisan and ones that are running for smaller offices. For example, the sheriff of Clark County has to appeal to 1,064,432 voters. That can get quite costly using traditional methods, as we're talked about before. And along with that, there's also our judicial candidates in Clark County, while they do have departments, are actually voted on by the entire county. So even judges have to run an appeal to that 1,064,432 voters. And that's a lot of voters to appeal to. And so having a means to be able to target voters, to be able to look at data and find that is really important to people surrounding PDQ. Now, we work with clients all across the nation, but we originally were set up to work for people here in Clark County. And so that is the reason why a printer cares about data, is because our owner kind of understood the kind of movement there. We do a lot of direct mail. One of the biggest things we do is direct mail, and people are looking at who they're going to send that mail to, because it's not feasible for them to send it to that entire group of people. So that is the reason why a printer is in this. You know, and so what I've tried to do when I got here was to try and figure out what was the best way to create a big data strategy type plan and tools that campaigns could use to then do that on a smaller budget. And so that's kind of what I did. But the biggest cog in that entire system, though, is where the data comes from and how important clean, updated data is. So there were many places I could have purchased data from, or I could have accumulated data from, but you know, as I began to ask these questions, I began to see that the data wasn't complete. So here are some questions that I'd like to share with you that are important for you to ask when you're talking and when you're doing your data acquisition. The first one is do you trust it's updated? It's very important to look at how updated your data is, because if your data is not updated but every 3 or 4 months, or let's say that the data is updated once a year. There was actually a particular vendor that told me they only update it once a year. Well, that doesn't do you very good when you have movers, when you have new registers, when you have things like that, and you need to be able to accumulate that extra ability to have that more updated and available data. So basically, the answer to this question is very simple, and that is it should be updated at least as often as your state and county updates it, because usually that's the only place to get that updated data. So that's the reason why. To be more specific, usually in most areas, the state and county update their data weekly during like your registration period. So your new registers, you're going to get that update once a week, and your counties are going to update and your state and counties are going to update daily if they have early vote period. In Nevada, we do have an early vote period. We're very fortunate in Nevada because the county does have a very good voter database to start from, and they update it regularly. It's easily accessible. But some places don't have those areas. You have to check with your, depending on what part of your state. I know Utah, the lieutenant governor versus the secretary of state, but a lot of states, secretary of state handles the voter registration in the state. Check with them, just find out how often they update, and if your proposed data acquisition does not update it that often, it's probably not the best option, and you should look at other options. And then the second question that I would say is, and this talks about do phones matter? If you plan to make phone calls, phones matter. And how updated that is also important. But it's very important also to look at the percentage. Because it doesn't matter what data you go with, you're going to find a very varying amount of percentages of phone matches and things like that. But the most important part about that is how often they verify it. And make sure that the data is correct. Also another good question to ask along with this one, I would kind of make this as, like 2B, is make sure you ask if there are any mobile numbers included, or if they know if mobile numbers are included. A lot of times your state and county databases will just have a number that they put in their voter registration form. Well, that could be mobile or a landline. Well, if it is a mobile number, if you use that for a robocall, you're going to rack up a whole lot of fines, and that's not really ideal for a campaign, because mobile numbers cannot be reached out to by an auto dialer. So just make sure that you do verify, number one, how often they verify it, make sure the numbers are up to date, and then also make sure that there aren't mobile numbers and if they are, a lot of times robocall companies will verify for you that they're not mobile numbers, because they also can be fined along the way. But just double check that. The third question, and this is one that's kind of been very interesting. Back in 2000, when John McCain was running, he was the first campaign to really start using emails as a method of contacting voters. And so emails have become such a very prevalent thing. If you are a supporter of the Democratic Party or the Obama campaign in 2008 and in 2012, you probably at the end of 2012 maybe even unsubscribed from emails because you were getting so many. Because one thing that's important to mention about emails is CAN spam does not cover that. So political campaigns can really email as much as they want to. Whether they should or not is another question, but they can, and they're not covered under CAN spam laws. So emails have become very important to campaigns, and an important way to do that one-to-one touch. And it also can be very cheap because you don't have to spend a whole lot of money to send thousands of emails. But the big thing, the most very important thing about emails is you never want to use the voter emails, just because that's the email that somebody put on their voter registration form, and if they registered 8 years ago, chances are they're probably not still using that AOL email address anymore. So it's probably a good idea to never use voter file. As a matter of fact, in our voter databases and what we do here, we actually purge all voter file email addresses for that purpose, and then we actually do polls for our clients. So on a regular basis. But the number one thing is to ask how often, again, that they're verified, kind of like with the phone numbers, and that they're done on a regular basis. Actually, just kind of a good rule to use is if an email address, if an email list is over a year old, it's old, and it's going to have a lot of bad sends and a lot of spam and a lot of things like that happen, which can really damage your email reputation. So let's say we have had clients who have used the voter file emails. They pulled it themselves. They've plugged it in. They've used it. But then within one or two emails, their entire domain has been blacklisted, and now every email they send goes to spam. And while cheap or free sounds great at the beginning, if you are sending emails like that, if you only can send one or two emails that actually get to the inbox before it all starts going to spam, it really does you not a lot of good. Finally, well, no, we got two more questions here. So the next thing is how should you view historical data? And specifically, I'm talking about voter history. So the main thing here is you want to make sure that the file at least includes primaries and generals, because a lot of times strategists will look at both primaries and generals, and because primaries are going to be your more inveterate voters versus your generals. So that's the reason why you want to make sure you're getting primaries and generals, because that'll allow you to do better targeting in general. And the last question is, and this is one of the becoming even more important, is demographics. Our genders, our ethnicities and things like that. Those are becoming very important to targeting and being able to do that, especially for clients like the ones that we have that are having to reach out to 1 million voters. They want to go and be able to really delve in. So demographics, unfortunately, those tend to be the biggest hole on most lists because they're not required on a form. And so a lot of times you will see situations where state and county lists have only about 20% of genders and things like that versus, and so that's why you want to ask where your data is coming from. What is your percentage of matches when it comes to genders and ethnicities and things like that? So the most important thing to do is to ask that question as well, because in the end run, you can do a lot more targeting and things like that. Now, there's also a lot of other data out there. There's consumer data, donation data. There's things like that. But these are just the questions to ask about the core part of that data. But again, I guess kind of the biggest flow through this entire thing is really finding out how updated the data is and how relevant it is currently. Because if you, again, get old data, you might be knocking on doors that of people who aren't there and wasting your time of your canvassers and things like that. The goal is make sure that you verify how often that data is updated.
Awesome, Charles. Thank you so much. You've really given us a quick primer and a quick education in how to work with a base voter file. So I really appreciate that. It sounds like you've had a lot of experience and seen a lot of things in the wild with common pitfalls that befall some people. So thank you very much for that. So before we close up, I want to share two anecdotes that I think kind of sum up how our customers are putting these things in motion. One is something I sort of alluded to earlier, which is about how to really turn the stuff that you may feel like right now is just sort of left to the BuzzFeeds and Upworthys of the world to really develop your own first-party data collection mechanism. And I'm a complete nerd for this stuff, obviously, but this is where using data and being data-driven in your outreach gets really pretty sexy. So, a customer of ours that we've been working with now for about 3 years that is a very small organization did this very well. They are an organization that has a budget of around $1 million and they operate in a state. And that's not a huge budget for an organization that has 8 or 9 employees. But they essentially used a single landing page that they had tracking code on to pull up and create a politically neutral quiz to try to get a sense of where their audience was on certain issues. They were working on something at their state legislature, and a big problem that they were constantly facing is that they were taking their money to ad vendors, and they really had no way of knowing whether the people that they were getting back were really a good audience for them. Because, ads have been such a wonderful thing for this space, but a thing that happens often is that when you're doing lookalike modeling or you name it, it's hard to know if the matches that you're getting back are really going to be matched on the things that are true indicators for you. So, you may be looking for someone who has a certain type of predilection towards some issue, and you're just getting back people who match the demographic profiles of your existing audience that may not be exactly relevant to you, what kind of car they own or what neighborhood they live in. So while those data points are important, becoming a part of that data collection funnel through a neutral quiz, this group did it very well. They used a single web page. They popped up a quiz. It asked people how they stood on an issue, and they were driving activity toward that page with ads. But what they were able to do with that afterward was really interesting. They were bumping up the results of that quiz to the voter file, which they were having matched automatically within their account. And then they were able to really verify the outcome. So they could see, look, is lookalike modeling working for us? And they also were able to see with a much more granular level, are we actually really the right people? So, that outcome is really, I think, a big piece of that. Another case study that I've talked a lot about with folks before, and I should mention that we can follow up with these case studies when we do the recap for you all, but is a trade association that we've also worked with for a long time that really didn't even have a grassroots audience. They did have a bigger budget, but they hadn't really proved value on the data side, and so they started small, and they used digital ads to test issues on Pandora. Pandora, of course, everyone knows is the music app, but also an ad vendor, and they're connected to us via API. And so every time a person would come in on a Pandora ad, they were able to append voter data directly to those people and see a lot of things about their audience. They were able to see, who are my people? Are they single women in Kansas, or are they actually married men in Florida? So really being able to build a truly holistic view of exactly who those folks are. So I think that Charles and Ashley can probably share with us more creative ways that they've seen this happen. But I want to go ahead and pop into questions because I know that we're running a little bit over in time. And the first question that we have is actually a question for Ashley. And it was, Ashley, if you can just speak briefly to sort of how data impacts the role of your digital team. How are you able to track a person across a lot of different channels, or do you need to? Does it matter? But if you can touch on that, I know we have interest from one of our asks.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's making sure to not lose the forest for the trees. I'll be honest, we're not typically tracking individuals. You remember with online, with digital advertising, people love to use the word micro-target, but you need to use it sparingly. We do want to work in large enough universes where it's efficient enough to spend money and not be paying, out the wazoo for actual ads, meaning what we call our CPM isn't super, super high. So, the benefit, I think, of basically getting back to the brunt of it, the benefit of being able to know, a great example is, looking through and recognizing that a particular user has opened a volunteer email and an end of month email, and consistently those types of emails for 3 months, but they've even clicked, but we've never seen them actually fill out the form. So let's say Mary Smith has clicked 3 times on a volunteer email, but we don't have her as submitting a volunteer form. Well, clearly there's some interest there. So now we can turn back around and go and have one of our volunteers call her and say, hey, we've noticed that you've, interacted with a lot of our content about, being a volunteer, or, however you want to phrase that, and say, would you consider, we'd love to, extend an invite. Would you consider volunteering with us? And that may be, we've identified someone who has a high propensity to be a volunteer that we can then go after. In the same way, same thing with the potential donor, right? Pick up the phone, make a phone call to a donor, or make a particular appeal to them. There's other ways to do that, but that just gives you a good example of how we can go and look at some of these folks in a little bit of smaller buckets, but not necessarily individuals, if that makes sense. And then we can keep going. We can go down the road with, use examples like that for GOTV or for, I mean, you name it, a bunch of different things. But that should hopefully get your mind kind of churning on different ways that you can see how these users are out there and doing stuff. But again, the key is you got to get that first party data in there, because if it's not in there and it's siloed, you ain't gonna be able to find anything else out. So
yeah, that's very interesting. So looking for those tells. Maybe a person hasn't completed that conversion yet, but is right for it. Interesting.
yes.
Charles, do you think that among groups that you work with, when you see groups working together that are allied groups, do you find that there's a potential for those folks to make use of first-party data together or share their first-party data? Is that a useful exercise for people, or how do you know whether a partner's data is going to be helpful for you in your outcomes?
Honestly, that's a very, very, very big, varied answer on that. And it really depends on how compatible and what you're doing with that partner is. And, sharing data and things like that can be very good in some cases, because you might be able to get data that you might not be able to find, after they've shared it and actually started working in it. Sometimes it can already be, tainted though. So it really depends on the goals of the two partners and things like that. Really, we've always advocated for our clients and the people that we work with to have their own data and start with their own raw data, just because it's cleaner. Now you can add into that, and using things like CrowdScout, or you can use to upload and merge together data and do that. But I usually discourage the mixing of data, unless you're working together like a slate of candidates working together, like maybe a assembly caucus or something like that.
That's really interesting, because I think data pooling is sort of where a lot of people are going, but it sounds like what you're saying is that being your own data master is more important than ever. So that's interesting. So I know that we've been going for a while here. So we have a bunch of questions. We'll try to get to them in the recaps, but I want to just end on the same question to both of you. Charles, maybe you'll go first, and then we'll turn it back over to Ashley. As you look toward this coming cycle, what are you most excited about, or what do you think will be most surprising? You can pick about whether or not campaigns are getting to a data-driven place or not, and where do you see that going?
Well, I think you're going to see, interestingly for me, at least for my talking with people on both sides of the aisle and things like that, it's interesting the push that I'm seeing on one side versus the other. A lot of on the Democratic side are actually pushing to move away from highly specified data, because some of those folks believe that may have been somewhat responsible for the last presidential election. But on the other side, I see Republicans moving very heavily towards using data and pooling and things like that, even more than they have ever before. So I've kind of seen kind of a shift, varying between who's using it and who's not. But I think what we'll probably see is both sides kind of moving into more of an area of kind of the middle of the road thing, where you're using data but not relying on it as 100%, where you get your decision making and things like that.
Cool. What do you think, Ashley?
Sure. I think for me, my goal is to get some. My hope I would say we're starting to see this in the conversations we have, is see campaigns adopt a CRM. That is integrated across the board. It's not just lip service, but it's actually in use. It's not just digital, but we're seeing navigating, the fundraising, everything, the mail, everything flow into it. So that for me is really kind of both a personal goal and also where I hope we are moving in that general direction. Again, like, Charles said, we're not obsessed with it, but we're putting it in a spot where it can be used efficiently and it can help inform decisions as we make our way through, closer and closer to election day. So that would be my goal, and hopefully be able to have much smarter campaigns for it.
Awesome. Well, hey, Ashley, Charles, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate you guys and appreciate your partnership. And thanks so much to our team for setting this up. And thank you so much for the folks on the line. We hope that you found this fruitful. Our team will be in touch with follow-up from this webinar, including access to the recording. And we hope you'll join us for a future